The Burning Man Festival is internationally known and one of the most amazing venues for art and self-expression ever created. Katie Hazard is the co-lead of the art department, and she coordinates and serves on the BRC Honoraria Committee and manages art processes, people, and placement, all towards having the most awesome art possible in Black Rock City and beyond. She's a graduate in art history from Notre Dame and has a history of working with the Art Institute of Chicago and Harvard University. Please give a warm welcome to Katie.
So good morning, everyone. As Jennifer said, I'm the co-lead of the art department at Burning Man, and I'm excited to share with you a little bit more about our city. I've been involved with Burning Man for 17 years, which is hard to believe I've done any one thing for that long. I was a participant and volunteer at Burning Man for many years, and then moved to San Francisco 5 years ago, and so started working in the headquarters office there. So what is Burning Man? I mean, you can ask 100 people, and you'll probably get 100 different answers. You know, everyone has their own kind of experience there. People think it's a concert, it's a transformational festival, it's a pagan ritual, it's an art show. I mean, I hear all kinds of things from people who haven't been. Actually, who here has been to Burning Man? Anybody? Yay, okay, cool. So you probably have your own definition of what you think Burning Man is too, and that's great. It's different things to different people. So for those of us, though, who organize the event, we really think of it as a city, Black Rock City, or BRC we call it. So a little bit about what it is. Like I said, it's Black Rock City. It's in northern Nevada. It's 120 miles north of Reno in Pershing County, Nevada. This year we had 74,000 participants come. It happens over the course of 8 days and nights, 24 hours. It's at the end of August. It's leading up to Labor Day, so end of August, beginning of September. And it's 6 square miles. And Burning Man, the organization, provides a lot of infrastructure. We provide 1,600 porta potties and no garbage cans. That's one of the big things there, is leave no trace, so everyone takes with them what they brought. So while we provide the infrastructure, the participants that come to the event provide all of the content. So really through 3 ways people engage. One is through art installations, like this amazing piece called The Space Whale that came from a group in Reno. This year, at this year's event that just finished, we had 317 art installations like this. So all brought by participants. We don't commission the art. Another way people engage is by bringing mutant vehicles. So we don't allow driving there, but we do allow really radically modified mutant vehicles. So I'll show you a few examples of those later on. And then theme camps. This year we had over 1,000 theme camps. And this is where people live, but it's also a real opportunity for interactivity. So I'll share more about the theme camps in a bit too. And who goes to Burning Man? People if that haven't been, have ideas of, it's all young people, and really it's, the median age is 30 to 34. So a third of the people there are under 30, but that means 2/3 are over 30. 15% are over 50. More men than women, 60% male to female. 36% are first-timers. But what's interesting is that 65% of people that come back again another time. Like, there's really something in there that once you go, you kind of get the bug and you want to keep coming. 72% have a bachelor's degree. The median salary is $55,000. And we've got people coming from all 50 states and 40 different countries. It's becoming more and more international as time goes on. So 20% international now. And it's pretty family friendly. There are up to 1,000 kids that come every year. So the philosophy of Burning Man is really based on 10 principles. These are our values, and they're descriptive, not prescriptive. So we wrote these down in 2004 after Burning Man had already been happening for almost 20 years. But they're the values that we as a community embrace. I'll just highlight a couple of them. Radical inclusion is that anybody is welcome, really, no matter who you are, where you're from, what language you speak, everyone's welcome. Another thing that's really unique about Burning Man is the decommodification principle, where there's no advertising, there's no sponsorships, there's nothing for sale there. The only thing you can buy is coffee or ice. And it's just really refreshing to go a whole week not spending any money. There's not this transactional relationship. You have more of an immediate connection with people. What else? I'd also like to highlight participation. That's a really big thing. That one of the early slogans of Burning Man was "No spectators." So anyone that comes, you bring whatever it is you like to do. If you make the best grilled cheese in the world, you come and you make your grilled cheese and you give your grilled cheese out, or whatever it is. You know, each person can think of like, what's the thing I love to do, and offer it freely to everyone else there. And immediacy is also a key one. I think part of it is, you know, when there's no money, that there's this real, you know, and you don't have your phone, and it's just, you're really interacting and relating to people in the present moment in a way that's unusual for our lives. So just a short bit about the history. It was started in 1986 by a gentleman named Larry Harvey and his friend Jerry James. There was a tradition of bonfires on the beach in Baker Beach in San Francisco, so it was kind of in line with that. On the summer solstice that year, they decided to build a figure of a man and burn it. And people liked it. And so they were like, hey, let's do this again next year. So they did it for a number of years there on the beach until it got too big, and the authorities in town were like, you know, what's going on? This is too much fire for our beach here. So in 1990, they moved to the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. There was already a group of folks having events there in that same location, and they said, hey, why don't you bring your man and burn it, and so we'll do it all together. So we moved to the desert in 1990. That year it was 120 people, like a camping trip, really. And at that point, there was no urban plan, there were no rules, there was no speed limit, there were guns. It was, you know, just a big free-for-all kind of temporary autonomous zone. But over time, in the early years, from up until 1996, the attendance doubled year after year. And by 1996, it was 8,000 people, and that was enough people that we really had to start coming up with more of a plan. So we started to develop an urban plan. So this is what Black Rock City looks like from above. It's a plan that harkens back to ancient cities where there are radial streets that all point inwards towards a focal point. So that circle in the middle is the man. So this area here is where all the camping happens. And then art is all placed at the open area at the center because we really prioritize the experience of the art. And it's interesting how the circle remains open, right? It's not a full closed circle because it's a beautiful landscape. And for us, it's really important to have the nature still be a part of the experience. There was a point in the late 90s where we got the circle closed a lot closer, and people realized, like, oh, that's not good. You know, we want this open, expansive kind of feeling. So just a little bit about the layout of how the city is structured. We see it like a clock face, so this has a clock superimposed on it. So the radial streets are a time. And then the circular streets, there's an esplanade on the inner row, and then the streets go out in alphabetical order with a street that starts with an A and a B and a C, et cetera. The street names change every year, but they always start with A, B, C. The man is right at the center of the clock. Where the 12 o'clock is where we build a temple every year. And at 6 o'clock is where we have the Center Camp Cafe and some of the municipal facilities. So you can have an address here. You know, people say like, oh, I'm living at 415 and D, or you know, there's like a real plan to how you find things around here. And a little bit about zoning. The purple areas are where we pre-place registered theme camps. And then the white areas of the city are just open camping. So if you don't have a plan to who to camp with ahead of time, you can just set up there. And then a little bit more about zoning. Along the 2 o'clock radial and the 10 o'clock radial is where we put the big sound camps. So some people bring, the camps come and bring big stages, and their DJs come and play on them, and we put those along the outer edge, and they face outward so that the sound isn't coming in towards the general population. There are also some other zones besides the sound camp. There's a whole area called Kidsville that's all the family-friendly stuff. There's another area called the Alternative Energy Zone, where there's lots of solar panels and green energy stuff happening. So yeah, there's different sort of zones within the city. This is an example, a year ago, our placement map. So you can see this is how all the theme camps get placed in. We have a whole team that places these 1,000 camps ahead of time. And this is interesting. It's all of Black Rock City superimposed over San Francisco, so you get a little sense of the scale of the city. And so here we are from above in the Black Rock Desert. It's 40 miles long and 7 miles across, just where we are. So we're placed where that little Burning Man symbol is. It's an ancient lake bed, like I mentioned. It's the largest ancient lake bed in North America. And this is what the ground looks like. Lots of people are like, it's sand, right? And you hear desert, and that's what you think, but probably people from this area know a little bit better. But the ground here we call the playa, and so it looks like this. And this is how it looks when we leave, or when we arrive. And this is also how it looks when we leave. With our Leave No Trace policy, we pick up every last piece of everything. Participants take with them everything they brought, and then we have a resto team that stays on for about 3 weeks after, and they walk in lines, and they pick up every last little piece of wood, every sequin, every cigarette butt, so that when the BLM comes in and inspects afterwards, it's completely as we left it, maybe better than we found it. So part of this environment includes dust storms. There's some really significant weather that we get there. Really hot days, really cold nights, and intense dust storms that can last for days occasionally. Sometimes they blow right through, sometimes they keep going, where visibility is, I couldn't see those chairs right there. It can get so thick. So when we think about building our city in an environment like that, you have to really think about, well, what am I going to build that's going to withstand 50-mile-an-hour winds? And you start thinking about lift and about anchoring. And so, yeah, it really influences a lot of the way that we build our city, the weather. So as I introduced before, the organization provides a lot of infrastructure. So I'll just share some of the highlights of the infrastructure that we have. We have full-on medical facility. There's a real hospital with x-ray machines and an operating theater and a whole military-grade section that's like pressurized so that the dust doesn't come in. And you can get airlifted out if need be, but most people are able to get treated on site if anything comes up. We're proud of the fact that our response time for emergency medical situations is 5 minutes on average. And we have 700 volunteers in this department, nurses, doctors, firefighters, crisis intervention. There's a couple of happy firefighters. And we also have a team called the Black Rock Rangers. So there is a police presence there from external sheriff's office, Pershing County, Washoe County, BLM. But there are only about 100 of them. And then we have 900 volunteer rangers, we call them. And so they're participants, just regular people that come to Burning Man, but they've been really highly trained in conflict resolution, peacekeeping. So if if issues arise, we have this team of volunteers who are the kind of first responders. So we sort of self-police in a way that feels good. People, when they see rangers, are happy to see them. They're not like, I'm going to get in trouble, but they look to them to help them solve issues, interpersonal issues. Our street lights are actually these spires with oil lamps lit on the top. So there's a whole team of volunteers called the Lamplighters that go around every evening and hang these lights from the spires. We have several radio stations. This one is BMIR, Burning Man Information Radio. We have several newspapers, but yeah, BMIR is the most well-known radio station. It has music, but also public announcements and interviews, and sometimes I lead art tours, and they'll record that on BMIR and play it out. And one of the neat things is there are no ads, right, because it's part of the decommodification principle. We also have an airport, 88NV. It's the only temporary seasonal airport approved by the FAA. And for the 1 week that we're operational, for those 8 days, it's the busiest airport in all of Nevada, more than here even. And we just 2 years ago started having commercial flights come into Burning Man. So you can just go online and buy a ticket on a flight. There are private planes that come in too, but you can buy a ticket from a bunch of cities in the West Coast. And this year we had 3,800 participants come in through Burner Express Air, it's called. But our transit system on Playa is bicycles. So many participants bring their own bicycles and decorate them to all kinds of fun degrees. But we have a free bike sharing program there where you can just borrow one. You see the green bike, you ride it, you leave it. A main piece of infrastructure Burning Man builds is the organization builds itself is the Center Camp Cafe. So this is right at the 6 o'clock arm of the clock face that I showed you before, and it's the largest tensile structure that we have there in Playa. There's coffee for sale in there, but it's a whole scene. There's like people doing acro yoga and like singer-songwriter stages that get booked, and you can come in and get some chai and have some shade and talk to some people. It's a nice kind of central gathering hub. Lots of theme camps also have free coffee, so you don't really have to go there for coffee, but it's like the cafe of our city. And so, because we're on BLM land, we have to get a permit for this event that happens, and so we get a closure order, and we get access to the land about 2 or 3 weeks before the event starts. So for all of that stuff that I was just showing you, we don't have that much time to actually build what we're talking about. So here's some folks building the cafe. We do it with a lot of volunteers. We own a ranch nearby that we have a lot of containers on, so we store most of our stuff nearby and can easily bring it over. There's a lot of planning up front, right? Like sometimes we joke that it's meeting man because we spend, like my day, people are like, oh, you work at Burning Man? And I'm like, well, it's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of meetings, it's still that kind of work. So things are really highly scheduled down to the, here's when the VR comes in, here's when the lift happens, like all the teams come in and orchestrate what they're doing. So it's a lot to do in 2 weeks, but we do it. And then the man at the center is another piece that the Burning Man organization builds. So it's at the center of the city. It's open 24 hours. People sometimes say, but what does it mean? And we kind of say, whatever you want it to mean. It's different things to different people. This was this year's man. There's a theme every year to the event. That our founder, Larry Harvey, the guy that I was telling you started it on the beach, he comes up with a theme every year. So this year's theme was radical ritual. And the man is usually on some kind of base or pavilion that relates to what the theme is for the year. So this is this year's man base. We have this ritual at the very beginning. The very first thing we do when we get access to the land is there's a golden spike that we hammer in right in the center, and then that's the point from which we survey. And so right where the golden spike is where the man gets built. So this year was called the Temple of the Golden Spike. Like that's our ritual. So who does all this stuff? Who makes all this infrastructure? The radio, the airport, all this stuff. We have 104 full-time year-round staff at our office in San Francisco. And we have more than 7,000 volunteers every year, which is huge. If you think about the fact that we've got about 70,000 people, it's 1 in 10 people volunteer. And it's a really big part of our culture, getting involved, participating. People value what you do more than, what maybe your job is in the rest of the world. It's like, I helped build this thing, or I organize this team, or I, work in, what team you're in becomes a way that you affiliate with one another. So volunteerism is a huge part of our organization. And in the art department, we have more people wanting to volunteer than we have room for. We have about 350 volunteers in the art department, and we had something like 1,700 people last year, 1,750, say they wanted to volunteer on our team. Like there are more than we have room for, so it's lucky. So while we do the infrastructure, it's the participants that come that create all the content. There's no main stage. We don't book any talent. People write into us on the website like, I'm this band, and will you book me to play Burning Man? And we're kind of like, just come play, we don't orchestrate all of that. So if you have a theme camp, you can build a stage and invite your friend's band to play, or even invite some big famous DJ to play if you want. But it's all organized by people that come. So we think of it like we are creating the canvas upon which the participants can build what they build. These are some people at their theme camp. This is a funny theme camp that's called Thunderdome. Sorry, just got a little bit loud. That's a sort of joke on the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. They have inside these little hanging, bouncing things, and people can have little fights with they're soft boffers, but it's a whole thing. Here's some folks building their theme camp together. Just the process of coming together with a group and building your camp is really a great way to build community. And so we have all kinds of structures. You have to bring your own housing. And so people have come up with all kinds of solutions. Like I was talking about how the environment really affects the way that we build our structures there. People have come up with all kinds of interesting solutions. There's actually a book by a French photographer named Philippe Glade that I have a copy with me that's all about the architecture of living structures at Burning Man that some of you may find interesting. But some examples are, this on the top left is called a hexayurt. It's just made out of insulation that's taped together and guy wired down. In the top right, you can see a whole range of things. There's an RV, there's a carport, there's a Buckminster Fuller style dome, there's just regular tents. People come up with all kinds of creative solutions. The bottom two are a little more interesting, not just like a tent, but this one on the bottom left is made from some folks who spent a lot of time in Bali and got all those materials there and reconstructed a Balinese-style place. This one is made out of corrugated polypropylene. It's kind of like so your camp is where you live, but it's also where you hang out. So it's kind of like a little shaded living room of sorts, a little hangout spot. And a few of the more dramatic living structures there at the top. Those are zonohedral domes that this artist called zomes. They're made out of interlocking wood, and they're modular and nice and breathable. In the middle, there's all kinds of teepee sorts of structures come. And then the bottom one I find beautiful. It's this colorful stretch fabric. So these folks have teepees set up around the edges, and then in the middle is this area where they have whatever kinds of workshops they offer at their camp. So you might have a yoga class in there, or you might have, all kinds of activities would happen in that shaded area. And so the mutant vehicles that I mentioned before, this one is one of my absolute favorites. It's called El Pulpo Mecanico. It's an octopus that the arms go up and down. It's all like hydraulic actuators, and fire spits out of the top of the thing, and it's made out of totally recycled materials. Like there are, it's made out of like muffin tins and colanders and all kinds of things that this guy has just put together. But it's one of people's favorites. It's kind of fierce, but also, silly. It has a little personality. A few more of the mutant vehicles. This one in the top left is the Mayan Warrior, which is this big thing from Mexico City with a state-of-the-art sound system and lasers and all kinds of things, all the way down to this group that brought a baker's dozen of little cupcakes, where each one was in their little... So, like I said, I'm the co-lead of the art department. So for me, really, what I love the most about Burning Man is the art. It's the first year I went in 2000, it was the thing that really blew me away. I mean, you don't see things like this in other places. We, this year, had, like I said, 317 registered art installations. And one of the things I really love is that we let anybody bring art to Burning Man. There's no process by which we curate or we say, like, I don't really like how that looks, or that doesn't look good enough. We invite anybody that wants to bring whatever they want to Burning Man to come. So we review for safety and engineering, and if there's going to be fire, we'll review for that. But I love that people can just decide, I want to build some little thing out of PVC, and we're like, great, bring it, And then the next year they're like, well, now I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and then 10 years later they're building pieces like this. So it's really a great training ground. We have a few grant programs in the art department. The main one is the Black Rock City Honoraria program. So this funds art meant for the open playa here at Burning Man. Last year we had 550 people apply, and we funded 73 out of those to bring their art. And when we decide what we fund, we're really looking for a whole range of experiences, small, large, things with fire, things that are good in the day, things that are good at night. We look for interactivity as a big one of our criteria. You don't have to have been to Burning Man before even to get a grant, although it's helpful if you have, but we allow first-timers even to apply. So yeah, the grant program is a great way that people find out in March that they're going to get this funding. The budget for the grant program is $1.2 million, so they have about 6 months. Most people get somewhere around $20,000 on average, and most of the money is used for materials and for transportation. Transportation's a big thing, right, because we're in the middle of nowhere, so getting it, even from, say, like New Zealand, you might have to ship it in the middle of July for it to get there by the end of August. So yeah, there's a lot to think about with the logistics of getting it there. So aside from the 73, then we had an additional 213 that are self-funded. So most folks don't get funding. They will crowdfund, they will work from their community. Some people sell their work afterwards or have sold it the year before, but most of the work is not funded by us. And one of the things that I love about the landscape there is that it really can inform what designs people use. So, I mean, it's this huge open space, right? You're not like in a city where you have this much by this much and it can't be this more than this tall, or really, the sky's the limit. Your imagination is the limit for what you want to build out there. So people dream up all kinds of things. This one's a particular favorite. It's called the Big Rig Jig, and it was there in 2007. And its form of interactivity was that you could climb up inside of it. You could enter at the bottom and work your way all the way up to the top of the top truck. This piece is called The Totem of Confessions. It's wood, mainly. It burned at the end with a lot of photo collage and mixed media over the top. This piece is brought by an architect from London, actually. He's an architect and a professor at the architecture school at the University of Westminster in London. And his belief about architecture is that he thinks that the architect should also be the builder or the maker when possible. So he designed this piece, and he brought a bunch of his architecture students from the university with him out to the desert, and they built this piece together. It's called Tangential Dreams. And it won an architecture award. It won the Architizer A+ award last year. It also burned at the end. And this piece was brought by one of his students. So the student came with the professor and learned how to build in the environment there, and then the next year came back and brought this piece. It's sort of like a forest meets a cathedral, made out of wood instead of stone because, transportation and the logistics of being there, but it's a nice piece. This was a total favorite of lots of people, the Black Rock lighthouses. I don't know if you can see the scale there where the people are, but the tallest one is about 60 feet tall. And it was a whole interactive wonderland. Like, you could climb up inside them all, and there were bridges that went from one to the next, and the interior of each was done by different artists with different designs. And the top of one or two had rotating lights like a lighthouse, and the other couple had fire that would shoot out of the top of the lighthouses, and that was a real favorite. This was brought by an artist from the Ukraine that really had a lot of impact on people. After the event, oftentimes people will write in and say, like, what was this project, and who's the guy, and can I buy it, and what, do you have a poster? And we don't have posters, but this was one that people still are like, who made that? And I really like the meaning, the kind of adults leaning away and the kind of inner children reaching in. This is a series brought by an artist named Marco Cochran. Some of you might recognize the first one on the left there is called Bliss Dance and was bought by MGM in Vegas. It's installed here. So he did these 2 years apart. It's the same woman model each year, really big scale. And he built it with his wife and a whole team. But for him, it's a lot about his statement behind it all. He does a lot around ending violence against women. And so for him, this is the way to celebrate the female form. These are really fun. It was a field of mushrooms. There were about 7 of these mushrooms brought by the same people that made that little living room area that I showed you before. So it matches. It's the same kind of corrugated polypropylene. They had actuators inside so that they had this like slow, subtle movement. It was almost like they were breathing. So if you stood on a little platform right next to it, it would activate it. And it's kind of origami-like, right? So it would kind of go like creak, 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 like they would be breathing in and out. Some would kind of be breathing up and some more out. And it was a really lovely installation. That's a crazy steampunk mutant vehicle airship right next to it that happened to pull up when this picture was taken. This is a really neat piece. It's called Serpent Mother. And it was brought by a group from San Francisco called the Flaming Lotus Girls. And they're a really interesting organization that's been around probably 10 years now. And what I love about them is that they welcome anyone into their collective, and they'll teach you. So tons and tons of people have learned to weld or have learned to make propane fire art by being part of this Flaming Lotus Girls organization. It's not all girls, but it's a lot of girls. This was a skeletal serpent. It was 148 feet long, and all along the spine there were little flame effects, propane. And the whole thing was also a hydraulic system, and participant-driven. So like I'm saying with the interactivity is a big part of it. There were some places where participants could push the buttons and it would make the fire go, but then there were also ways to interact that would make the head of the serpent like leaped up, and the jaws would kind of chomp. And it also creates a really nice social space. Like you can see a lot of people, you're out at night, you come, and it's a nice place to just hang out. This was a tree that was here this year. It had 25,000 leaves on them for a total of 170,000 LEDs. So, and each of these LEDs were individually addressable. So it really made this amazing canopy of light that they could do all sorts of interesting light shows on. It also had some biofeedback mechanisms where you could hook a thing onto your finger and it would get your heartbeat. So you could be laying under the tree and it would hook into this one section, so your heartbeat would start to affect the lights in the area of the tree that you were in, so you could really get a sense, and over some time, like the heartbeat started to come together in a way, and it's really neat. It's also a good example of prototyping. Like they used a new sort of LED here that it's a great place for people to try new things. You know, a lot of, even though we're decommodified, I'm sure people come there and try out what might be their product eventually. This is another cool light art piece. It's a Medusa. This artist, we gave him a grant in 2015 to bring this project, and it was a really big reach for him. It was a bigger, like way bigger than anything he had ever built, and he didn't finish it. And that's okay, you know, it happens sometimes that people aim kind of too high. And so he came back again in 2016 on his own dime and got everything to work, and it was great. It's nice to see that happen, you know, and enough people come year after year that you're like, oh, there's that Medusa that didn't work, and like, oh, wow, that's what it does when it works, you know, fire and lights. This, I like this piece. It's the interaction here is really musical, so it's kind of like a three-armed spiral galaxy. You can see two of the arms coming down, and there'll be a participant at the bottom of each of the three arms, and they're far away. They're like 60 feet away, so you can't really communicate. But there was a keyboard and something that you could be making music on, and then what you were playing would travel up the cubes in light and then a little bit in fire, and so together you're composing this musical piece that's expressed in light and in fire. And these are really lovely. This is a couple from San Francisco. It's called Hibikozo that they've built, and they were so popular and so loved that they've created a company based on these. So now they've been placed like this in a lot of civic settings in San Francisco, in Miami, Dubai, but they sell these now as little, like we have one in my house that's, you know, maybe this big. It's a light like this that, yeah, it's turned into a product after having been to Burning Man. This is a neat piece called the Coyote that is all in metal and climbable, and the head spins, so you could climb up there and then get the head to twirl on its neck in this way, so it would, like, you know, howl at the sun and the moon. And then a couple of years later, the same artist, after building the Coyote, was kind of his working way up to building something bigger like this. This is a wild boar that he named Lord Snort. Also, same thing, climbable, spinnable, lots of personality. And people like large animals there, like the coyote and the boar. This is a lawn flamingo that was here this year, kind of pop art style, complete with a white picket fence and some AstroTurf. The artist said, you know, if Burning Man is our home, I want to decorate my front lawn. And this is just a shot of, so really, like, some things aren't interactive, you know, they're just something beautiful to look at, but really the majority of work there's some way that you can get involved in it. Sometimes it's pushing a button to make the fire, sometimes it's climbing, sometimes it's spinning, sometimes it's you sing into a hole, you know, one person has to do this, so the other person does this, or, you know, so many of the things there, like, the world we're used to with engaging with art is so museum, gallery, don't touch, there's a guard there that's going to see if you've touched it, whereas at Burning Man, it's like, walk up to it, feel what it's made out of, like knock on it, you know, touch it, see how the welds were made, climb it, like find, you know, figure out, like, oh, if I stand on this light and you stand on that light, what happens? You know, there's just this real sense of engagement in a way that you don't get with a lot of art in the world. This is a neat project called Talk to God. So anybody can walk up, it's a phone booth, you know, you pick up the phone, and on the other end is another person. And the other person is actually about 100 feet away in a little pavilion, so they can see you, and you could see them if you knew where to look, but you don't really know where to look. And so it's been out there for probably 10 years, and I've heard stories of people that have had, you know, really meaningful and significant conversations in this thing. And you can be on either side, right? If you know the people that run it, you can be the one that's the god, so it's cool. Especially in the last number of years, we've had more projects coming from kids, and this one is actually brought from a kid here in Vegas. It's the youngest grant recipient we've ever had. He was 4.5 years old when he filled out the grant with his parents' help. His parents had been going to Burning Man for a long time, so he had some idea. He designed this from Legos, and then his parents took it and, you know, made the grant out of it. It's called the Jedi Dog Temple, and it's a temple for kids. So it was built here in Vegas in their backyard. They engaged lots of families in the Burning Man community here to come help, and the adults did the building of the structure, but the kids did all the decorations on the inside. And it was fun during the event to go in there. You know, there were always like kids of lots of ages in there. Like there were things for, you know, toddlers up to age 10 or something playing inside. It was a neat thing to see. And like I mentioned before, there's a stronger international presence coming. In 2016, we had 7 international grantees out of our grant program, and this past year, 2017, we had 18 international. So it's really growing in terms of how many people are bringing art from abroad. It's quite an endeavor. I mean, imagine trying to ship your things all the way across the world. This was brought by a group from Valencia, Spain, where they have a tradition in their city, it's called Las Fallas, where they, as communities, for generations, they build effigies and burn them. So, you know, there's a lot aligned with Burning Man. And so we learned about this, and they learned about us, and did a kind of a cultural exchange. And some of our staff went over to Valencia, worked with them, and then we invited them to come to Burning Man and build a structure. So this is the piece they built. They have some kids on their team, too, which is neat. This is another international piece from Taiwan. It's a temple to Mazu, the goddess there. Then you see some things that you are used to, but with a different kind of twist. This was a giant Rubik's Cube that there were like mechanisms at the bottom that you could work together with somebody, you know, to try to figure out, okay, you turn it this way, you turn it that way. You know, it never got solved, but it was fun to watch. Or another play on a normal thing. This is called Dance Dance Immolation. So there's this game called Dance Dance Revolution where you dance, and it's like a video game sort of thing, but this one is with fire. So as the people that are going to dance, they get a whole immolation suit, and they're standing there, they're doing the dances, and if they mess up the dance, they get fire shot at them. This is just a nice example of how I like it that people there can fail. You know, it's fine if you don't do the thing that you thought you were going to do. There's so many learning experiences that happen as a result of this that we really encourage people to try whatever you can dream up, you know, within reason, with safety and that kind of thing. But people aim high, and they don't always get there, but they do eventually. So I feel like there's a lot of learning that's available as part of the process of failing that we encourage. This piece is called The Trojan Horse, and just to do a quick case study on it, I love this line that he said, "My closest friends today are the people who built this with me." There were 80 people that built this Trojan horse. Half of it was built in Oakland and half of it was built in Reno. It cost $80,000 to build. It weighs 30 tons. It's made up of 193 wooden panels, and it had 42,000 LEDs on it. So this team, it took them a year and a half from when they started designing it to when they actually brought it out to the desert. And they had all kinds of participatory things during it. They staged events, and people dressed up as gods and goddesses. And the kind of culminating event was that they dragged it 2,500 feet, 250 feet, to the spot where they burned it. So it was quite a thing. But there was a lot of skill building involved. The artist Dan Fox also talks about how he taught a lot of people on his crew all kinds of construction techniques, and that he said that people have since gone on to do things like, you know, somebody put an addition on their house because they learned how to build this horse. And so, you know, like people learn a lot by working together, and there's a lot of skill building that happens. So what about the burning part, right? It's Burning Man. People think like, oh, you just burn it all at the end, right? And then you go home. And it's true that a lot of art burns, but not as much as people think. This year, 12% of the projects that came to Burning Man burned all the way down. So not as many. I think partly because there's more people want civic placement afterwards. But anyway, so there's still a lot of burning of the art. And the other thing is people are like, well, why would you burn that thing you just spent so much time trying to make, right? Like it's. And so for me, it's really speaks to how we're more interested in the process than in the product. So it's the coming together, it's the skill building, it's the capacity building, it's that the Trojan horse guy's best friends are the people he built this thing with. Like that's really what we're about. I mean, the Burning Man event is great, but people don't just come to look at the pretty things. Like they're engaged in a way where they are working with their community. They're developing these relationships. They're learning how to do things. So it's sort of like the Tibetan sand mandala kind of thing, you know? It's about the actual doing of it, not so much of what the outcome of the final piece is. Oops, I skipped ahead. So the last art piece I wanted to talk about was the temple. So it's our spiritual home. You know, every city has a spiritual center or many. And the first temple we had at Burning Man was built in 2000 by an artist named David Best, who had just lost a dear friend in a motorcycle accident. So he decided to build a sort of memorial to his friend. And it was enough that he built this thing as a memorial, and it turned out other people at Burning Man had people they wanted to grieve, and they also put up, you know, their mom's photo or their dog's photo or their, you know, things that they had gone through. And it was really moving. And so we built another one the next year, and it's become a tradition in our city now. So some of it's about grieving, but some of it's about celebrating. It's probably the most common place where people get married. Lots of people get married at Burning Man. I got married at Burning Man. My husband and I did a wedding at Burning Man besides our other legal one. So yeah, lots of people get married at Burning Man. So the temple is just a really lovely gathering place. It's, you know, you see people sitting there meditating, you see people crying, you see people laughing. You know, it's a really like a space with a lot of heart. Some people on the inside you can see. It's interesting, too, the way it starts off, just this blank. It's made out of wood because we burn it, so it's blank, right? And day by day, more things get added. People write things on the walls. You know, just walking through there and reading some of the things that people wrote, it's really moving. And then we burn it. I'm not sure. This is a video. I'm not sure if it's going to... Can you try to play it? It's really short.
That's the video?
Mm-hmm. That one turned out beautifully. I mean, there's a lot about designing a building that will burn well and that will fall well. But I mean, if you're like me, like when you see that moment where it falls, you just get this like, oh, you know, this sense of like, and it just moves you in a way to see a really big structure like that burn. This year I was on the perimeter team, so that, you know, when something burns, we have a group of folks that stand in a circle around it to protect the people from the fire. And I was on that team, and so when you're on that team, you don't watch the fire, you watch the people to make sure they're all safe. And I was a little disappointed not to see the building burn. But instead I saw all these faces all lit up, right? The glow of the fire on them, and just these expressions, like some people just silent tears, and some people, you know, just like silence, and it's just really beautiful. And I had this sense of like, you know, what's building behind me is the temple, but the people in front of me are equally the temple. Like it's the experience of all of us being there together that is so moving. And the man burns as well. This was in 2013. That burn is a little more raucous. The man burn happens on the Saturday night at the end, and it's a lot of celebratory energy. The temple burn happens on the last night, on Sunday night, and that's the sort of more calm, meditative environment. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of possibilities for things to go wrong with so much fire without permitting, that kind of thing. And so we like there to be a little element of danger, at least of it feeling that way, but we also, you know, have insurance and lots of reasons why we don't want people to get hurt there. So we have a lot of things in place to have safety be at the forefront. In a way that maybe isn't always that obvious to everyone that's there. You know, we like to kind of maintain this dangerous vibe, but we have a lot of teams that are all dedicated to safety. There's the fire art safety team that they do a lot of educating people on how to build fire art ahead of time, but then they inspect every piece up front, and you have to submit all sorts of schematics and fire plans and things like that. The art support services team, they do a lot before the event with reviewing people's engineering. We don't require stamped drawings, but there's a whole level of if it's this tall and it's climbable, we need this information, and if it's this tall, and you know, so we require a lot of documentation up front. And then once we're out there, we have a few teams. There's a team called Eyes on Art. They go around at night and make sure everything is lit well, because aside from those few street light things we have, it's dark out there. It's the middle of nowhere. So art has to be lit well, or else someone riding their bicycle is going to ride into it. So we have this team that goes around and checks on that. And then the safety team also goes around and inspects things. If something's going to be climbable, they'll climb it before it opens for people to be able to use. Remember that Thunderdome theme camp I showed you? This is a little image from there of 0 days since the last injury. That, you know, it's like the joke of like, we keep it dangerous, but honestly, there aren't very many injuries. And so while we're very concerned with safety, we love that there's this sense of spontaneity there. You know, anything can happen. Like, you can bring whatever you want. You can set up your instrument and play there. You know, you can walk from here to there and never know like what you're going to encounter along the way. That's neat. Like, you might see people making a banana parade. You know, there are so many kinds of people out there, and you're bound to find the people that are like you. So the question sort of is, why is this relevant? You know, why do we need Burning Man right now? Why does it sell out within minutes? And for me, I think it's a lot about how we've become kind of disconnected. You know, people are in single-family homes. They're on their phones all the time. There's not a lot of, you don't talk to strangers on the street. And for me, this kind of community of really engaged people building their city themselves the way they want it every time it fills a need that I think that I experience in our culture, this kind of sense of separateness that you know, you'll just talk to whoever you run into. It's such a different kind of experience interacting with folks that way, people really feeling committed and engaged. And Burning Man changes people. We do a census every year, and 86% of the people say that the changes that they experienced at Burning Man persisted after they left the event. And it's now become a global movement. People think of us as the 1 week in the desert, but at this point now we have 85 other events that are like Burning Man, but are organized by local people where they live. They loved Burning Man so much they wanted to start one in their own city. We have regional representatives all over. There's a couple contacts here in Las Vegas that do work. One of the biggest regional events is in South Africa, 13,000 people. It's in its 11th year. And so about 4 years ago, we became a nonprofit. Because Burning Man is just that 1 week in that one place, and it sells out and it's not available, we want to have more of a global movement here. So we've seemed to have found a way that in this one context, people are really at their best, you know, both creatively and professionally. And so now we're looking at how do you bring that to everyday life. This is our mission of our nonprofit. There are a couple service organizations that have grown out of Burning Man. One is called Burners Without Borders. It started in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina happened at the same time we were at Burning Man. And they do disaster relief all over the globe. They also do things like beach cleanups in Corpus Christi. They have a mobile resource unit that's kind of like a makerspace in a container that they've brought to areas where there have been disasters. They were in Nepal for a while recently. And so they bring it there, and then they let all the local people use all the tools in there to start rebuilding. It's a neat program. And then there's also Black Rock Solar that has done over 100 solar installations in northern Nevada, at tribal lands and schools and nonprofits. And they've taught the most people how to install solar of anyone in Nevada. So it's a neat process. Also around the world is Civic Art. So we have a grant program. We will fund people all over the world can submit. They can never have been to the Burning Man event, but we'll fund them to build interactive, collaboratively built art in their city. And some of the art from Burning Man winds up getting civic placement. This rocket ship was at Burning Man. That mantis that's over at the container project that I saw last night, I was like, I know that from Burning Man. So things wind up in cities. And then some of our artists go on to do other projects. This artist, Leo Villarreal, he wasn't really an artist, and he was at Burning Man in the late 90s, and he wanted a way to find his tent at night. So he made this like fun light thing to find his tent. And then he was like, oh, making light things is cool. Like, I'm going to keep going. And he's obviously kept going because he is responsible for doing the Bay Lights on the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. The This is a shot of the night of the man burn. It's like the time when everyone is all coming together. But I just wanted to encourage you all to think about what is there in your work, in your life, that can take a key from this. Like, how can you be more engaged? How can you be more collaborative? What ways are there for you to interact with people in an immediate sort of way? Like, what can you bring back to where you live from these lessons? And that's it. Okay. Questions? Yeah.
Most of the art installations, are they built or assembled or constructed all during just that small period of time? Or are most of them brought somehow transported?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really recommend that people build beforehand and install on site. So because it's the Leave No Trace event, if you do a lot of building or if you're cutting any wood and wood chips, you know, it's hard to get every last thing there. So, and also people only have like at the most 2 weeks to do their installation there. So most things are mostly built ahead of time. There's a lot of design that goes into thinking, or a lot of the thinking about transportation that goes into the design, like what can I fit in a 20-foot or in a 53-foot container or a flatbed, like how am I gonna, which pieces can go together well to get it out there. Yeah, so mostly ahead of time. Yeah. Someone else over here have a question? Yeah.
You talked about the modified vehicles, which is really cool. How do people get there if they're not flying?
So the question was, how do the mutant vehicles get there, or how do the people get there? Well, there's only one road really to get by the time you get there, so that's been an issue with us for traffic. So we've started some forms of public transportation, especially too now that there's more of an international community. So there's Burner Express Air, like I mentioned, the air service, but there's also the Burner Express bus that goes from Reno and San Francisco and LA. I think it was 7,000 or 8,000 people came in on the bus this year, so that if you're flying into Burning Man from Denmark, you know, you can then get a bus ticket that will bring you right out there. And the bus stops at a grocery store, you know, it has a lot of room for, everyone has a lot of stuff, right? Because none of this is there, and then there's tons of stuff suddenly. So when you're driving to Burning Man at that time of year, it's really entertaining to be on the highway because you see these trailers with like, you know, half a dragon and 100 hula hoops and a bunch of bicycles and, you know.
Yes, it looks like a very pedestrian city.
So once you get there, you park your car and then that's it. You can't drive it anymore. So the main way people get around is either on their own bicycle or on these mutant vehicles. The mutant vehicles are open for anybody. So even if it's, I mean, the cupcakes, no, but like the giant boom box, you know, if you and your friends own that boom box, the idea is that anybody can say like, hey, can I get on? You know, you welcome whoever fits. And you know, I've gotten on things before and I'm like, where are we going? And they have no idea, and you get off somewhere further from where you ever wanted to be, but you know, that's kind of how it goes, and you wind up having an interesting experience there. Yeah?
Do you keep track of Civic Art, like how much of that is purchased? Because obviously there's quite a few pieces in Vegas, like the truck thing you showed is down here, and the frame mantis, and the pentagram. But like, how does people know where some of those pieces are leading out?
That's a good question. We don't. I mean, it's only been a couple of years that we've been a nonprofit and doing more art in civic settings. If somebody received a grant from us, we want to know when they sell it, but if they just were self-funded and they brought a piece and then they take it home with them, we do ask them all at the end, you know, everyone that brought a registered art, we ask them to fill out some feedback and we ask them for information about their plans after the event. Because we do like to know, our civic art group is small, we have 2 people on that staff, 1 part-time, but they're really starting to build up a thing of cities will ask us for, do you have something we could put in downtown Dubuque, you know, and we're like, well, we have a database, we can look at who lives there, we can look at, you know, this project burned, so it's not available, and this one sold it to this vineyard, and so that's not available, but so we're working towards figuring out, you know, do we as an organization want to be some kind of a broker? Do we, like, we're not quite sure what the direction is, we'll take that. We're just about to start a program with the City of San Jose. It's a 3-year program where there's a public art platform in front of City Hall that will have a rotating piece, one every 4 months, I believe, over the course of a couple of years. And there's a lot too about not just taking our art and like putting it in someone else's town and being like, there you go, you know, have fun with it, but how do you engage the local community to feel like they are part of it in some way? I mean, the pieces are usually interactive, so there's that, but coming up with different types of programming around it so that people get some sense of ownership about the pieces that are in their town. I'm going to go with you because you already got one.
Can you tell me how long it takes the lake bed to become a lake bed again after you leave?
Well,
I mean, like
it depends on year to year. Yeah. It depends year to year. This year there was so much snow and so much water, and there was still standing water at the end of June, and we were worried. But it can happen still that up and through until June there can still be little bits of puddles here and there. We do a lot of soil sampling, and you know, we have people go out there and test to see how far, how we anchor things ahead of time. But
do you, sorry, I'm just curious about the physicality of the
yeah.
So just the compression or the sand, or not the sand, but the earth. Are there traces of the roads and where people were and where they drove spikes a year later?
Yeah, that's part of the yeah, so we don't let people dig more than 3 feet by 1 foot in any kind of direction like that, and if you do, you have to say what you dug and fill your hole back in, and we do ask ahead of time when people first register their art, how many holes are you planning to dig, and we talk with them about how they want to do that. There's a lot of ground anchors and earth anchors that are used to hold things in place. With the roads, you kind of can't help but have the main streets still have some, I mean, it's more compressed there, but then a dust storm comes along and then it's all of a sudden it's dunes and you can't see where it was anyway, so it pretty quickly, yeah. Yeah.
What's it cost to attend, and is that a total part of your funding and your money sources?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How do you put together these terrific budgets for all of this?
Yeah, it was how much does it cost to attend and where does our money come from? So a ticket for the whole 8-day event is $425. There are a lot of people that come, a lot of the volunteers that come get a free ticket, or staff, you know, so not everybody pays the $425, but that's the main part of where our operating budget comes from, is ticket sales. We, as a nonprofit, the nice thing about that is now we can start fundraising. So we have a new department of philanthropic engagement. So we're starting to write grants, do individual giving, that kind of thing. So we're bringing in some money that way, but it's a $39 million is our annual operating budget. And we bring in about $2 million in donations and grants. So mostly ticket sales. Yeah. How's the time today? Okay. Anyone? Last one? Yeah.
How many years in advance do you have to
Yeah, how many years in advance do we schedule? Well, our grant program for next year is opening next week, so we're already, you know, as soon as, before we even leave for this year's event, we're already planning the next year. So, but then long term, because the federal government is our landlord essentially, we have to do a lot around the permitting and getting the closure order, and we're just undertaking now an environmental impact statement that's a 10-year plan, so that'll be due in 2019, so that's already a plan for the 10 years leading out to that, so it kind of depends on which part of the planning, but...
Is it sold out for next year?
No, tickets go on sale in January. Yeah.
You said it's sold out within minutes.
It does. It's we do them online, and you register yourself ahead of time, and then there's like a time when it opens, and there's frantic refreshing and, you know, getting your ticket. And, lots of people get their ticket that way. I mean, they sell out, like I said, I mean, people just buy the tickets when they go on sale, whether they're going to use them or not. So a lot of people that are like, how do I get a ticket? You know, the best way is really connecting with people in your community, because that's where, when someone has a ticket, they go, we're really, really against scalping. If we see any of that happening online, we'll cancel that ticket. Yes, you can get my card after this. In fact, there's the last slide. So please feel free to come chat with me afterwards. I love talking about Burning Man. Obviously, if you have any questions or want to know anything else, please feel free to reach out.
Katie, thank you so much. That was awesome.